Boss fires a single mom. 10 minutes later, he realizes his biggest mistake. It only took 10 minutes for him to make a decision that would change his life forever. A decision that, in the moment, seemed so simple, so final, but would soon unravel in a way no one expected. The office was quiet, the kind of silence that usually felt comfortable, but today it felt different. Chris, the boss, sat at his desk, staring at the papers in front of him. He had just made a call he thought was necessary, at least that's what he told himself. Across the room, Sarah stood with a slight tremor in her hands, trying to hide the exhaustion in her eyes. She had been working tirelessly for months, juggling long hours at the office with caring for her 2 young kids at home. Her manager had promised her a promotion, a reward for her hard work, but instead, she was now standing in front of Chris, listening to words that crushed her hopes. "You're fired, Sarah," Chris said, his tone cold and distant. The words hit her like a slap in the face. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. She had done everything right. Worked late nights, handled the toughest clients, even covered for others when they couldn't show up. And now, just like that, it was over. Her kids, she thought. What would they do? How would she tell them? Her heart sank, but she couldn't afford to break down here. Not in front of him. Not now. "I've seen enough," Chris continued, without even looking up. "I need someone who can give 100%. Someone who's not distracted by personal problems." Sarah's face flushed with the sting of his words. She had always put her family first, but she never thought that would be seen as a weakness. Chris didn't know the half of it. He didn't know how she woke up every day exhausted, barely able to scrape by, but still managed to get the work done. He didn't know how hard it was to keep everything together on her own. But at that moment, none of that mattered. To him, she was just another employee who didn't measure up. A simple choice made in a few words. As Sarah walked out of the office, she tried to hold her head high, but the weight of her reality was already sinking in. What would she tell her kids? How would she explain to them that their mother, who had worked so hard for so long, had just lost everything? She tried not to think too much about it, to not let the tears show, but deep down, she knew this would be the hardest thing she'd ever have to face. Meanwhile, Chris sat in his office, confident he had made the right decision. He thought the problem was solved, but what he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly have imagined, was that in just 10 minutes, he would realize his biggest mistake. 10 minutes. That's how long it took for Chris to think his decision was final. But in the quiet of his office, the weight of what he had just done slowly began to settle in. Sarah walked out, feeling a mix of disbelief and anger, but mostly a growing sense of fear. Fear about what came next. How would she make ends meet? How would she explain this to her kids? She had no choice but to get into her car and drive home, her thoughts running wild with possibilities she didn't want to face. At home, her 2 kids, Lucy and Ben, were waiting for her, sitting at the kitchen table, their faces lighting up when they saw her walk through the door. For a moment, it felt like everything was normal, but Sarah knew she couldn't keep the truth from them for long. "Mom, you're home early. Did you get the promotion?" Lucy asked, her bright eyes full of hope. Sarah paused. The words were caught in her throat. What could she say? How could she tell them that their world was about to change in ways they didn't understand? She swallowed hard, forcing a smile. "We'll talk later, sweetie. I'm just glad to be home with you." The weight of her own lie hung in the air, and as the kids went back to playing, Sarah found herself staring out the window. The tears came then, quiet and soft, but relentless. She couldn't afford to break down in front of them, but the pressure was unbearable. Every single day felt like a battle, and now it felt like she had lost. Meanwhile, back in the office, Chris sat in silence. He thought he had made a smart decision. He believed Sarah's personal life was holding her back, and the office couldn't afford distractions. But as he sat there, the hours passed, and his mind couldn't stop circling back to one thing. Did he make the right call? The thought bothered him more than he expected. It wasn't that Chris was heartless. He had always considered himself a fair boss, one who gave everyone a chance. But he had his standards, and when Sarah had asked for time off last week to attend to her son's health issues, he felt like it was too much. She wasn't the only one dealing with problems. He had his own pressures at work. His company was growing fast, and he couldn't afford to have anyone slack off as he saw it. But now, as the office grew quieter, and as he replayed their conversation in his mind, he couldn't help but feel a nagging sense of regret. Maybe he had been too harsh. Maybe he had missed something more important than just work, something human. At that very moment, his phone buzzed. It was a message from his assistant. Sarah's situation? She was the one handling the largest client project. If she's gone, we're going to need someone else to step in, fast. Chris rubbed his forehead, suddenly realizing the weight of the mistake he had just made. Sarah wasn't just another employee. She was the heart of the team. The project she had been managing was crucial, and now, with her gone, the entire thing could fall apart. But there was more to it than that. Sarah had been handling everything on her own, working under pressure with a single mother's strength. Chris hadn't seen that before. He had been too focused on performance and results. But now, it was hitting him. He had just fired the one person who had been keeping things together. Chris stood up from his desk and paced. His decision was starting to feel like a mistake, a huge one. Could he fix it? Could he undo the damage he had done? As the minutes passed, Chris's confidence began to fade. He couldn't stop thinking about Sarah's face, the quiet resignation in her eyes when she walked out. He could have handled that better. Much better. There was still time. He grabbed his phone and typed a message. Sarah, please come back to the office. We need to talk. But even as he hit send, he knew things might not be that simple anymore. Sarah had her limits, and this could be the moment where everything changed. Would she come back, or would the damage be too much? Chris waited anxiously for a reply. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours. His phone buzzed, and he rushed to check, hoping for a message from Sarah. But it wasn't her. It was his assistant, updating him on the status of the client project. It was clear now. Sarah's absence was starting to show. Everything was beginning to fall apart. He stared at the phone, his mind racing. Was it too late to fix this? Could he make it right? Just as the doubt began to consume him, his phone rang. It was Sarah. His heart skipped a beat as he answered. Sarah, I wanted to apologize. I made a terrible mistake. Please come back. We need you. I need you, Chris said, his voice shaky. There was a long pause on the other end. Chris waited, holding his breath, praying that she would give him another chance. Finally, Sarah's voice came through, soft but steady. I don't know if you understand, Chris. It's not just about the job. It's about trust. You made me feel disposable, like I didn't matter. And now, I'm sitting here with my kids, trying to figure out what's next. I don't even know if I can come back. I don't know if I want to. Chris felt the weight of her words hit him like a punch. He had never understood the depth of her struggle, the long nights, the constant balancing act of being a mother and an employee. He had never truly seen her until now. I'm sorry. I was wrong, he said, his voice thick with regret. I thought I was doing what was best for the company, but I didn't see you. I didn't see how hard you were working, how much you were carrying. I can't undo it, but I can promise you this. I will make things right, whatever it takes. There was silence again. Chris could almost hear Sarah's thoughts, wondering if she should trust him. He had broken her trust, and he knew it would take more than words to fix it. I don't know if I can just come back, Sarah said quietly. But I'll think about it. That's all I can promise right now. Sarah hung up. Chris sat back in his chair, staring at the wall, completely still. His fingers trembled as he put the phone down. His heart ached. He had no idea if Sarah would return, and even if she did, things would never be the same. He had learned the hard way that people are more than just employees. They are human beings, with their own struggles, their own lives, and their own worth. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, and Chris realized something he should have known all along. People are irreplaceable. Sarah didn't just manage the project. She held the team together. She made sacrifices every day that no one saw. She was more than a worker. She was a mother, a fighter, someone who deserved respect. And Chris had failed to see that. A few days later, Chris sat at his desk, still waiting for Sarah to return. He hadn't heard from her since their phone call. The project was in disarray, and the stress was mounting. But even as the pressure built, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was bigger than just business. That night, as he was about to leave the office, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Sarah. "I'm coming back, but things have to change. For both of us." Chris read the message and felt a wave of relief. But it wasn't just relief. It was the realization that this moment would change everything. This was his chance to do better, to be better. Sarah returned the next day. She didn't say much, but her presence was enough. It wasn't an immediate fix. It would take time, trust, and a lot of work to rebuild what had been broken. But Chris was willing to do whatever it took. And as the days passed, he learned the true value of leadership, not in being the boss, but in understanding and supporting those who work with you. It wasn't just about the bottom line. It was about people. Sometimes we make mistakes we can't undo. But the true measure of growth is not in avoiding mistakes, but in how we learn from them. People matter. Never forget that. What do you think about Chris's decision? Do you think he could have done anything differently, or do you think it was the wake-up call he needed? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear how you would have handled this situation. And hey, if this story hit home for you, maybe stick around for more real stories that'll make you think. Just hit that subscribe button. It's a reminder to keep growing together.